Hey gang, and welcome back. Just a reminder, you can now use the promo code MTGMudsta, all caps, at flipsidegaming.com. You'll get 10% off orders over $10 and help with the channel at the same time. Welcome back, my friends. This game has us visiting a new store, Platinum Star Games in Howell, New Jersey. We've got some old faces, some new commanders, and a whole lot of fun. This game, Liz has lent me her Dragonlord Silumgar deck, and I keep a hand with Noxious Gearhulk, Obnixilis Unshackled, Swamp, Island, Mindslaver, Thought Vessel, and Burnished Heart. Joe, who's new to the channel, is playing his Kaervek deck and keeps a hand with Expedition Map, Sword of the Animist, Phyrexian Arena, Chandra Torch of Defiance, Temple of the False God, Bloodfell Caves, and a Swamp. John, who's also new to the channel, keeps a hand with Kakusho the Evening Star, Scrubland, Verdant Catacomb, Unburial Rites, Fiend Hunter, Forest, and a Putrefy. Eric is also back, bringing with him his Ghalta deck, and keeps a hand with 2 Forests, Boreal Druid, Elvish Archdruid, Drove of Elves, and Wirewood Symbiote. Joe wins the die roll and starts us off. Joe plays a Swamp and casts an Expedition Map. John plays a Verdant Catacombs, cracking it and going to find a Savannah. I play an Island for my turn and pass. Eric plays a Forest and casts Boreal Druid. Joe plays a Mountain and cracks his map to go and find Myriad Landscape. He passes turn. John plays a Scrubland and passes his turn. I play a Swamp and I cast Thought Vessel before passing to Eric. Eric plays a Forest and then casts Elvish Archdruid. Joe plays his Myriad Landscape he found last turn tapped and casts Sword of the Animist before passing to John. John plays a Forest and casts Altar of Dementia. I play a Swamp and I cast Burnished Heart. Eric gets the ball rolling and plays a Forest before casting Elvish Champion. He then counts up his power and he finds that yes, he can in fact cast Ghalta for only 3 mana. He pays 3 mana and using his Boreal's Druid leaves 1 green floating. Eric then uses that green to cast a Wirewood Symbiote and he passes turn. Joe plays a Temple of the False God, which won't actually tap for anything, so he cracks his Myriad Landscape to go and find 2 of the same basic. He grabs 2 Swamps and passes turn. John plays a High Market, and with nothing else, passes. For my turn, I have no lands to play, but Liz gives me the thumbs up as I explain my next move. I cast a Gigantoplasm who comes into play as a copy of Ghalta. Eric draws and plays a Forest. He then taps more than 5 mana to cast Rishkar's Expertise, and Joe isn't thrilled by this. Eric is all set to draw 12, but John has the medicine with a timely Putrefy. Eric still gets to draw 3 though, and he plays Freyalise for free. He upticks her to make a token. Eric then uses the Wirewood Symbiote's ability to bounce Boreal Druid to his hand and untaps his Elvish Archdruid. He uses 1 of his remaining floating mana and then retaps the Archdruid to cast Drove of Elves. For Joe's turn, he plays a Command Tower and taps out to cast Kaervek. With nothing else, he passes to John. John plays an Isolated Chapel and casts Fiend Hunter, targeting my copied Ghalta. Joe has a Kaervek's trigger deal 3 to the Wirewood Symbiote, and I ask John not to go through with this, but my protests are ignored. Surprisingly though, John doesn't sacrifice the Fiend Hunter with a trigger on the stack, which would have resulted in the permanent exile of my clone. I play an Underground River and live the control player's dream, drawing and getting to say go. Eric upticks Freyalise to make a 2nd elf token, and then he casts a Nettle Sentinel. Joe has the Kaervek trigger deal 1 to Freyalise, before Eric then casts Ghalta, and Joe has Eric take 12 from the Kaervek trigger. Eric decides to get even though, and he swings 5 creatures at Joe, who braces himself to take 23 damage. With nothing else, Eric passes to Joe. Joe draws and plays an untapped Smoldering Marsh. Joe then casts Torment of Hailfire, where X is 6. John and I discard 3 cards and take 9 points of damage, while Eric discards 2, sacrifices a token, and then takes 9 as well. Joe then thinks about attacking, but realizes he probably needs a blocker after a play like that. With nothing else, he passes to John. John draws for turn, and I compliment his lovely Kakusho in his graveyard, and how it would be a shame if anything happened to it. I also ask Liz at this point if I can steal from graveyards. John isn't fazed by my smack talk though, and passes turn. At the end of his turn, I sacrifice my Burnished Heart to go and find 2 islands. For my turn, I cast Thran Dynamo, which triggers Kaervek, and Joe has the trigger deal 4 to Eric's Elvish Champion. I then cast Noxious Gearhulk, and Joe has the Kaervek trigger once again target one of Eric's creatures, this time his Elvish Archdruid. With the trigger resolving, my Gearhulk finally enters, and I have it to enter the battlefield trigger target Fiend Hunter. With the trigger on the stack, John casts Anguish Unmaking, taking 3 to exile Ghalta. He then sacrifices his Fiend Hunter to mill himself by 1. Joe has his Kaervek trigger from the Anguished Unmaking deal 3 damage to Freyalise. My Gigantoplasm then re-enters, and I decide to get in on the fun and have it come in as a copy of Kaervek as well. I then pass to Eric. Eric draws for turn and upticks Freyalise. He then casts a Thorn-Wheeled Archer, and Joe gets to put his Kaervek trigger on first, then I get to put mine on, and then we resolve mine first before we resolve his. Joe targets Eric, and I target John. Eric then moves to combat and swings the Drove at Joe for 7. Joe is concerned that if he doesn't block, he'll be at the mercy of my Kaervek triggers, so he puts his copy of Kaervek in front of the oncoming elves. Eric then makes a bold move though, and recasts Ghalta. I consult with Liz once more on who to target, and we both agree to nail Eric to the face for 12 damage. Joe draws for turn, and casts Chandra Torch of Defiance, and I have my Kaervek deal 4 damage to John. Joe then plays a Blood Crypt untapped, taking 2. He upticks his Chandra to exile the top card, and decides to cast a Desecration Demon. I have Kaervek deal 4 damage to Chandra, and Joe passes turn. John untaps for his turn, and flashes back on Burial Rites targeting his Kakusho. I have the Kaervek trigger deal 5 to him, and Kakusho gets to re-enter the field, which is less than impressing for Eric because he's concerned he's gonna die. John then passes to me. I play an island for my turn and move to combat. I decide not to sacrifice a creature on my combat step to tap the Desecration Demon, and instead decide to swing my Gearhulk at John for 5. In my second main phase, I pay 6 mana to cast Mindslaver, and sacrifice it to take John's next turn. With the trigger on the stack though, John sacrifices Kakusho to the Altar of Dementia, dealing 5 to all of his opponents and gaining 15 life. This has the added bonus of killing Eric. John then has the altar target me, and I mill 5 cards, one of which is worse Spheres, and I'm kind of sad. We then move to Joe's turn as Eric is dead, and he untaps and draws a card. He plays Bloodfell Caves, gaining 1 life. Joe then moves to combat, and no one sacrifices a creature, so he swings the demon at me for 6. Before the damage is done though, Joe has one trick up his sleeve, and he flashes in Dictate of the Twin Gods. I have the Kaervek deal 5 damage to Joe, and I then take 12 damage. In his second main phase, Joe does uptick Chandra, exiling a Thought Vessel, but decides to leave it in exile, and deals 2, which is doubled to 4, to his opponents. He then passes to John, or should I say me. I draw for John and look at his hand. I decide to cast Entomb, dealing 2 to Joe. I then go through John's library and find Acidic Slime, putting it in the graveyard. With 4 creature cards in the graveyard, I can now cast Karador for 4, and I have Kaervek deal 8 damage to John, which is doubled to 16. I then sacrifice Karador to the Altar of Dementia, milling John and having Karador go to the graveyard. Having disrupted John's board enough, I pass to myself. I draw for turn and move straight to combat. I swing the Gearhulk at Joe for 5, and the Gigantoplasm at John. With no blockers in sight, I deal 10 to both of them, and they both die, and we move on to the next game. Game review time. So thank you to Platinum Star Games for allowing us to come and film in your shop. It was clean, it had these big wonderful open windows that allowed for great natural light to come in, which was perfect for filming. I'm incredibly surprised by how fast Ghalta was able to get out, considering that Eric mulliganed to 6. It took him 1 Dork and 2 Lords to be able to cast him for 3 mana, which is very, very fast for a 12/12. The downside of having a commander who comes out that easily is the fact that no one wants him to stay on the board because 2 connects and you're dead. Even if he wasn't the commander, taking 12 is not something you can just laugh off. I don't think anyone would have been laughing had he been able to resolve the Rishkar's expertise with Ghalta out, so thanks for John for dealing with that. John's Karador deck seemed very interesting, but unfortunately he didn't seem to have a lot of ways to start ramping early on, or filling up his graveyard beyond Altar of Dementia. I'm always down to compare lists, so it'll be kind of fun to see in the future how his deck performs versus how mine does. He did have a lot of valuable spot removals, so that was fantastic in this kind of game, where certain creatures were very, very tantamount to winning strategies. Oh man, Joe's Kaervek deck, I mean, as soon as that commander resolves, people start taking damage and losing creatures like crazy. It got even more ridiculous when there were 2 of them out when I cloned it, and having Kaervek trigger when Eric cast Ghalta was basically a free way of dealing 12 damage to him. I think my having the second copy of Kaervek caused this game to go to 11 because everyone was worried about casting and taking damage or losing valuable creatures. This could have been even more ridiculous had Joe cast Dictate of the Twin Gods earlier on and the damage would have been doubled. Liz's Dragonlord Silumgar deck was fantastic and fun to play, and not just because I won with it. The Dimir color pairing has really started to grow on me ever since having played Dralnu, and being able to play a commander who could seal valuable creatures or planeswalkers is definitely something up my alley. I got to see a lot of new cards and a lot of interesting things that I might consider putting into some of my blue-black decks, so thanks again Liz for letting me use the deck. Please be sure to tune in every Monday and Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for a guaranteed new video. You can also follow me on Twitter at MTGMudsta. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/mtgmudsta. And lastly, you can check me out when I stream at twitch.tv/mtgmudsta. This video is brought to you in support by my patrons. If you're looking for a way to help out the channel, please be sure to visit the link below. Thank you all for watching this video, and don't forget, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.